I thought of like Eddie Murphy. Like
Okay.
my favorite stand up that I talked about it when we were talking about Patrice O'Neal. Like Eddie Murphy Raw
Right.
is the greatest stand up show I've ever seen. But
I got them all right here.
you can't do that today. But he's another
Oh man, the
person
opening one.
where, yeah, he's another person where he's like, yeah, like I can't, like, looking back on it, I'm like, and like I regret it a little bit. And it's just like, at that time, you couldn't do it. The thing is, today's comedian being that like homophobic or the different things I was being brought up, like you can't do it today, and that's a challenge for today's society. But to look back on that and be like, nah, like I was wrong for this. Like I couldn't do that. Like it doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, that's what made you. Like, and two, besides at the time, like I think like Eddie Murphy was only like 20, like four. Like
Yeah, he was
his it,
1982
yeah, he was
or something like that. 79.
well,
He's 60 now. Or yeah,
Raw was 87, so he was like in his 20s still.
yeah.
And we're talking about this as like two like 30-year-old guys. And it's like we're a lot different now we were in our like early to mid 20s. And that's just how life is. You learn and you grow. I think that's the point from it. I think if you're
Oh,
that same exact person, and it's just like, yeah, well, I did Raw, and like I'd do it again. Like if I did a sound, if like Eddie Murphy, like the thing that's being said is like Eddie Murphy, SNL was the first bit. Coming to America was the second one, and his next step is that he wants to do another stand-up special for the first time since Raw.
mhm.
So if he was like, oh, like I'm gonna do shit like I did in Raw, then you'd be like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, you're saying like if you didn't, if you regressed or if you stayed the same, it's way different than you acknowledging, oh, I said it back then, but I don't, I'm not, I don't,
Yeah, because it's a
yeah,
lot of stuff. I mean,
regret it.
like growing up, I used to like I grew up in the island, so I used to grow up listening to a lot of dancehall music that like was very extremely like homophobic in tone because this is like music you're talking about where it was like calling for like violence against homosexuals and shit like that. And now, me in my 30s, I listen to our music now. I'm like, all right, nah, like this ain't cool. Like this is like messed up. It's my growth as a person. And can people say that now? Because people will say, "Oh, I deeply regret this," and not really mean it. So I think it's more genuine when a person is just like, you know what, like that shit was cool then, but like today, not so much. Like case in point, me and you were talking about like a BuzzFeed article that I responded to
Mhm.
where they was presenting like different music facts, and they was trying to say that, well, the fact was that Aretha Franklin covered
Mm.
Respect, and the original version was done by Otis Redding. And they were trying to say in the line, it was like she changed the lyrics because they were misogynistic in tone. And it's like, I sent you the lyrics and I responded to it. When I listened to Otis Redding's version, I'm like, it's not misogynistic. It's just a song that was a reflection of the time, because back in those days, a man was expected to be the breadwinner and to bring home the bacon and to be the provider in the family. He was basically coming home and saying like, I just like like you could do whatever you want, but when I come home, just show me a little bit of respect. Like talk to me like a man and talk to me like a person you respect. It wasn't nothing misogynistic or nothing about that. A matter of fact, when you listen to the song, there's a point in the song where he basically implies that the woman could like sleep around on him while he's at work, as long as as long as she respects him when he comes home. I mean, it could be interpreted that way. It could also be interpreted that, oh, you could talk bad about me behind my back, but just respect me to my face and stuff like that. But BuzzFeed, trying to look at the song through a
Mm.
21 lens was like, oh, that's misogynistic. Like he's demanding that this woman respects. First of all, the song is like the refrain, like the chorus is the same. All I'm asking is for a little respect, a little respect. He's not demanding nothing more than that, but you're looking at it through today's lens. Whereas if you look at it through the time, it's just like, back in them days, a black man, he was probably making half what the white man was making. And if you was like, all right, you know what? We're all for gender equality. Let my wife be the primary breadwinner. You know what? Back in them days, a woman was making, like a black woman was making a half of what a black man was making in a workforce. So she was making a quarter of what the white man was making. So, that's what I'm saying. Like, people have to look back at things and think about the progress rather than looking back at something at the time and saying, like, this was wrong.
Yeah, and like me looking at the lyrics, I could place myself in that context. The context again, context is king. Of like, oh man, a long day coming home. Like, and I said to this to you, like, I can imagine it being, all right, when I'm here, you can fuck whoever you want to fuck. Like it come out like a passionate thing, like that's a vulnerable thing. Like if you're having a fight with someone like that, like you don't really mean it, but it's like just show me some respect, because you had a long day and you bring it home with you. I that's as a storyteller, I can picture
Hmm.
that in my head where it's like he brought all that stuff with him home, and he's just like just of all the people all day long, no one's giving me any respect. At
It
least
is.
you can give me some fucking
And
respect. You know what I mean? Like
Otis Redding died at 26.
26.
So
Yeah,
he
he's part of
like
that
he
club.
probably wrote that song at like 23, and this was a time when he was like 20 years old. Like, you
You
had to
look old.
go and like do like 12-hour shifts at the mill, 60-hour
Yeah.
work weeks just to break even. So it's a different time, and it's one of those situations
Mm-hmm.
where it's like it's a different time, but it's actually like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was a different time. It ain't one of them situations with like, we talked about it last week with the America not being racist thing, where it's like, yeah, like the 60s, America was great because we didn't have the blacks in our suburbs and shit like that. But anywho,
You brought up comedy. You brought up stand up, which is one of the main things where like it's that used to be like the forefront of putting things that make you feel uncomfortable. Now it's
okay,
like even if you attempt to do it, you can't even do it. But
okay, okay. So I'm
go
glad
on.
you brought that up. So this is something totally on the fly that I wasn't scheduled.
Ooh.
So Billy Crystal, huge
Ah,
Yankee
yes.
fan, made one of my favorite baseball movies that wasn't like a wide release baseball movie, but an HBO movie, 61.
I have the poster.
He's talking about how comedy is kind of like a minefield now. So my response to it was like, first of all, Billy Crystal, like, you're like in your 70s at this point. Like, why are you
So
still trying to like do
ageist.
comedy stuff? Like, you have all these royalties and probably all this shit that you have like your hands in. You probably don't need to try to be in comedy today. So it's kind of weird hearing about like, complaining about comedy from him. But my thing was, it's like, if you really think about it, I'm like, Billy Crystal, like, your most famous movie was a movie about a not so handsome guy playing a long game with a woman
Okay.
who was
Yeah.
gorgeous until, playing a long game in a friend zone with a woman who was gorgeous in when Harry met Sally. So of course, like, you would think like comedy is kind of like a minefield because that type of stuff would be kind of like Me Too ish. So my question is like what's your thoughts about Billy Crystal saying like comedy is a minefield? Because I kind of agree with him, but at the same time, I have an area where I don't agree. It's kind of a gray area.
All right. Tell me that quote, but don't tell me who said it, and I'll agree with it. But Billy Crystal is like, okay, again, like you were saying everything about him. I never saw him as like an edgy guy. Also, he's from like a different generation. I wanted to bring this up. Okay, so there is a generation of comedians from like the late 2000s and the last 10 years, and they were super, super edgy. And then now, in the last few years, especially in the last like 4 years, you don't hear anything from them. And not in the way that Eddie Murphy looks back and says, "Oh, I wouldn't say it now, but like, I don't regret saying it, or I'm not going to try to hide from it."
Hmm.
They are hiding from it, and they have podcasts from 10 years ago that you can't see it unless you're part of like a Patreon. So they're like, you're like a super fan. So there's no way for these people to get on YouTube and like, hey, look what this guy said in 2012. Let's cancel him, which I'm not for. But they're the ones who go out actively looking up people to cancel. Like they'll go up to someone like
Hmm.
like a Blake Crystal saying like comments in Minefield, hey, this guy said this, let's cancel him. And they'll be the active ones trying to get other people in hot water. Um, but they're not the ones saying the stuff they used to say. They used to say like crazy, like on purpose, edgy stuff, misogynistic, racist stuff. But now, like they hide behind a paywall on their podcast and stuff. And I mean, I can bring them up, but
Hmm.
you know who they are. Like they've been around. They have like Comedy Central shows, other places, FX, but they're not owning it. Eddie
Hmm.
Murphy would own it, you know.
Yeah.
But it is a minefield. There's like me and my brother were talking about this recently. How do you feel about Louis C.K.? He's been around for a couple years since that all happened. He's been touring. Even in 2020, he was touring. How do you feel about him now?
All right. So my thing on Louis C.K. is like I love Louis. We met the gentleman that played his brother on the show. He actually came and he was a customer at our spot, and
Hmm.
very cool dude. And one of the first things I said was like, "Man, I love you on Louis." Blah, blah, blah. I love the show because one of the things that that show did was he had a black ex-wife and two
Yeah, and they didn't even bring it
white
up.
daughters, and somebody asked him like, that's weird. Shouldn't your children be biracial, or shouldn't your ex-wife be white? Blah 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 blah. And this is before all of his stuff came out.
Hmm.
And he explained, he was like, "Well, the point is, I'm a person who had children with this person, and we're no longer together, but we're co-parenting. So race shouldn't be, factored into the equation." And that's how that show handled it. And it's actually extremely like progressive. And it's interesting because a lot of shit, the thing that he got in trouble for, they actually had an episode about, like masturbating in
Hmm.
front of somebody. And so he was basically telling you who he was. And
Yeah.
like his whole shit I find weird. It's just like why would you like whip out your like, privates in front of somebody unwanted and trying to make them feel uncomfortable? It's just like a weird fetish, and that's the weird place you go with fetishes, because it's something that it turns you on that other people may not understand. But in general, it's just there's a line that's crossed, and he took some time out, and comedy venues were booking him to appear at shows,
Mm.
and people were buying tickets to go to these shows. So a lot of people were looking at it and criticizing him. It's just like, oh, like this is like, why is he thing? Like we need to stop this and protest this and blah 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 blah. And it's just like the issue I have is that you shouldn't be protesting him anymore. You should be protesting the people that are buying the tickets, because they're the ones who are consuming him and wanting to see him and creating a demand for him. So, Mike, what's the thing I always say about cancel culture?
Oh, you said earlier too. The market uh dictates, right?
Yeah,
Is that
it's
what
the
you're getting at?
market dictating your necessity or your
Or
demand.
your value?
Exactly. So if you get canceled, so to speak, if people protest you, and whoever the gatekeepers are, or whoever the promoters are, or the producers, or whatever, and it's just like, all right, this guy's not worth, the juice is not worth the squeeze with this guy. That's the thing. But apparently there's still a market for a person like a Louis C.K. and people yeah, for Louis C.K. and people still want to see him. So I would
Yeah.
like move my animosity from it. Well, I guess you could still have your animosity towards him, but your animosity should be towards the people that are still consuming him. Much in the same way, like when we talked about Woody Allen, and I'm like, man, like I can't believe like Woody Allen celebrated like this, blah 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 blah. So what do I do, Mike? I go in and I talk about Scarlett Johansson, and I talk about all these different people that are making all of these excuses for him or saying like, oh, like that's what a kid said way back in 1992 and blah 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 and this that, and the third. Like I go after those people because going after Woody Allen is not enough.
Yeah, and the generation of those stand-up comedians I'm talking about, you used the word I was going to bring up, the gatekeepers, because they're the ones who run, not officially, but they run like the stand-up spots. So the people that haven't made it yet, these guys made it. These men and women made it, and they're dictating what you can and cannot say. What is comedy? What has value? What is forbidden now? Even though, like, of course, it was a different time, like the 2000s and the early 2010s. But now, like, these people they can't figure out their voice in a minefield. So okay, maybe it is a minefield. So they can't figure it out their
Hmm.
own voice and being edgy. Because the guys who are on top now, they have a lot to risk. We
Hmm.
saw it with, like Aziz.
Yeah.
A big fan of him. His show is actually coming back after that long hiatus, much like Louis C.K. He's coming back. Well, of course, it's way different things, but let's just say that he went away for a while. But his show's coming back. We'll see how the marketplace handles it. I think that's the best way to handle the cancel culture thing, right? With the thing you just said, because there's always going to be a marketplace for, and then when there isn't a marketplace, then that's it.
Hmm. I mean,
You find, yeah, you find your audience.
and then going back to like the minefield thing, I think we're in a place where like everybody wants to be an exception to the comedy and not included in the comedy. And I think like because everybody's looking at it like when you make a joke about a certain type of people, um,
Mm,
it's coming from a place of ignorance and not a place of understanding. So all that comedy has to be, all that comedy has to be like tampered down and kind of like cut off at the pass. So I seen like like a video where like it was like a white comedian and apparently like there's a person in the audience where like she was offended by something he said. And like he starts
mm,
reeling off the different things like he talked about. He's like, I talked about Mexicans, I talked about this, I talk about that, I talk about gays, I talk about that. But now that I talk about this one specific thing, now it offends you. And now, but the whole night you were laughing at all of these different things, but now it offends you. And I think that's the difference that like the comedy, it's not that like from the audience perspective, they accept the comedy about everybody, but when it starts hitting home, that's when it's like, oh,
mm,
this is messed up. Like the other night, like I was actually listening to something on like DJ Vlad, and he had like Godfrey on there,
mm.
and it was from years ago. It was from like
Oh,
maybe like 2017, and
I think I saw that.
they were talking about like Asian men and Asian women, and like for the last like 45 seconds of it, it was just some really like out of touch, out of time, out of touch. I'm out of time.
Out of my
Till I'm
mind
out
when
of
you're
night.
not around. Hey,
Shout out
whoa,
all those, but
whoa,
it was some
shake it up so we can. Oh,
it
keep going.
was some it was some out of touch, like out of time ass like Asian jokes, and it's like at the beginning of it, it was making like points, and I was like, all right, this makes sense. But then it got to that area, and I'm just like, I'm not Asian, but I was listening to it. I'm like, this shit, like, it's not funny. It's just not funny
Yeah.
because like some racist ass like jokes, and I'm like, hey, you're talking about like Godfrey, who's black, and Vlad, who's white, making these jokes. Now, if Vlad was interviewing like an Asian person and they was talking about like black people or Hispanic people, like it'd be viewed as racist. It's a weird place where people are making comedy from a place of ignorance and not a place of understanding. Now, if you make jokes from a place of understanding, it's like, yeah, I know. Like, all right, my Latin friends, they do this, but I'm black and I do this. Da, 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 da. Like me and Joel, like we'll joke a lot. Like me and him will go back and forth about like the Caribbean thing, and then him with like him being Dominican and how he does things different, how I do things different. It's coming from a place of understanding because he knows me, I know him, but I don't think like that minefield that he's talking about is just like it comes from both sides. It comes from the comedian, it comes from the audience. Like, is the audience offended by only things that offend them? And is the comedian making jokes just to be ignorant rather than, oh, I know this, so I'm talking about this. And if you find the humor in this, there's a joke to be had. I think that's the thing. Like a lot of people, like when people make these jokes or make these, like comedians, the things they say are just finding humor in things. It's not so much them making fun of things. And that's what makes certain comedians
Mm.
great. And that's what makes certain comedians falter. Like if you're a comedian and you can't find a humor in something without making fun of it, then you're not gonna be good. But if you're a comedian, you can find the humor in this shit, like you're gonna be great and you're gonna have a long career. So going back to the shit about like Eddie Murphy, like he found the humor in gay people being offended about him making a joke about Ralph Cramden and
Mm. And
uh
it's not reality based.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? So
Exactly. It's yeah. It was a joke he made about the honeymooners if they were gay.
yeah,
That's not. That's just a fun. That's yeah. That's ludicrous. Of course, it is offensive, but it's ludicrous. But you're talking about like a real thing that happened. Let's say they're reality based things where it actually happened to me. Like
and now what's funny, like now that you now thinking about it, when we talk about like the gay shipping thing, right? So if somebody made that same joke, right, after the MCU over the last 10 years, if somebody made the same kind of joke that Eddie Murphy did in Delirious about honeymooners, about Captain America and Bucky being gay, like how would that joke go over today? But in reality, all of these, oh, I love the LGBT. I'm a ally, and I'm this, and I'm that. Da, da, da. I go to gay pride parades, whatever, whatever. I saw Captain America and a Winter Soldier. And I think Bucky and Steve Rogers love each other. Like they're just acting like they're friends. Blah 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 blah. But if we replace Ralph Cramden with what's Cramden's friend?
Ed Norton.
Ed Norton.
Norton.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if we're like, listen, Bucky,
Mhm.
I can't remember the joke.
I'm gonna
I
take
listen,
my shield. I'm gonna take my shield. And I'm gonna pick it up. Okay. When I pick it up, my spandex, that type of thing.
yeah, and if you
I had
made
to
the
look at
same
whatever.
joke, right? What is people gonna say?
I just
That's
did.
homophobic. It's
Yeah.
insensitive. It's blah blah blah
Hmm.
blah. But it's then on the same side. It's like, all right, I'm looking at it. I'm like, them two guys, they're close. They're friends. They would sacrifice this and that for each other, but they're completely heterosexual. So it's a platonic relationship. We should respect it as that. And it's like, no, they're meant to be gay. And Marvel is too afraid of doing it. It's just like, you know,
Hmm.
where's the
Yeah.
balance?
I think everything needs to be put into context. But the Eddie Murphy thing is in the 80s. Um, I'm all for like looking back on things and reevaluating, but not just trying to omit it or just completely like if you don't have the ability to with the Otis Redding song, like try to see it from someone else's another voice's point of view. It's not the same as yours. I think we're lacking that now in this whole like laying in my bed all day, just canceling people, just trying to like, oh no, no, no. I've never seen this before. This never happened to me before, so it can't be real or whatever. Or
Mm.
it's coming from this mean spirited. It's coming from this, That's the thing that we're struggling with now with comedy. But a lot of things that are like is being presented as like this is the way to be. Like a lot of the
No,
things we
because
watch now, it's like
I think what you're asking in relation to what we're talking about is that you're gonna have to create a character, or you're gonna have to create a whole form of art, whether it's music, whether it's a play, whether it's a movie, whether it's a TV show, whether it's stand-up comedy, where your material can't be something that has to be looked at with a microscope years into the future. But I think in reality, I think is that we're living in a time where there's a lot of conviction, but there's not a lot of understanding. And I think that as time goes on, like the two are gonna meet, where we could look at things like, okay, this was then, this is now. How can we rectify things so that it would be better in the future? And I think that's gonna be the end point of it. I think right now it's like a whole area of confusion because even with the Me Too shit, like even if you look back on that, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say on it, even if you look back on that, it was a lot of very real shit that was going on where a lot of guys was using their position or their money or their power to sexually harass, sexually assault sometimes, or most of the times women. But at the same time, there was on the other side, there was a lot of like false accusations or a lot of false equivalencies. You know, Aziz Ansari, where it's like, all right, this girl was, oh, I'm going on a date with Aziz Ansari. I'm unsure if I should sleep with him or not. I ended up sleeping with him. Now I regret it. But looking at all these women who had like very real instances where guys force themselves on other women, whether it be physically or whether it be mentally, whether it be by circumstance, they force themselves on them. I'm gonna equate my situation to them. So I think it's an area where there's confusion, but I think there's a point once we move past all of this and we could really start to look at things, like there'll be a space where there's the understanding and there's a criticism, and we could find like a place in between.